Speaking of everywhere, please be joined right now on the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line by my colleague at the NFL Network and be hosting a show prior to the Jets-Jaguars game tonight. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is the Rich Eisen Show debut for my good friend, Mike Garafolo. Let's give him a round of applause. Mike, you made it. You made it.
Hey-o.
Hi, Rich. How you doing, Rich? Everything good?
Yeah, no. It's me.
No,
It's Tom.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's your friend. Set the scene for me here. I know you're not at the stadium yet, but a relevant Jets-Jaguars game on Christmas week. This is probably this might be a first-time ever occurrence.
So, my weekly, mostly weekly assignment. I missed a couple, but Thursday Night Football was going to be my assignment for the entire season, along with Steve Smith. And so I looked over the schedule, and I was like, oh, look, they got some good games here. And I got into December. I'm like, who schedules Jets-Jaguars in December? Like, what were you expecting from this game? And so it started out that way. And then early in the season, it was like, well, wait a minute, that's actually going to be good. And then it took another dive down, and I was like, it's going to be terrible. And now as we got closer, it's like, you know what? It's interesting enough. Both teams are still alive. I believe both teams could be eliminated tonight, or at least one team, the Jets, can, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like, okay, at least it hung in there, and it's entertaining, and the weather could make it a fun watch as well, although it's not going to be fun for us standing down there in the rain and the wind.
We got rain? How is it raining? Isn't it like 10 degrees below zero?
No, it's going to be in the 50s. So the weather is going to come, the temperature is going to come up throughout the day as the rain comes down. And then overnight, like it's a high of 56, I think, today.
What?
Let me open it up. So it's a high of 54 today. Tomorrow, a high of 57, a low of 14. So it's going to start warm overnight, and then it's just going to nosedive, and all this rain that's coming down is probably going to freeze.
That sounds like a lovely drive home for you.
I will probably see. Steve and I tend to leave at halftime, so we'll watch the first half from the stadium and then get out of there before. So I think I'm going to pull that. Usually it's back to the hotel, but this is a home game for me, so I'll watch the second half on the couch.
You spend a lot of time around the Jets, Mike. You know a lot of people there. It's been an unusual quarterback situation for them throughout the course of the season because Zach Wilson just, what do we had, about 20 months ago, taken number 2 overall in the NFL draft, one pick after the guy he's going against tonight in Trevor Lawrence. He's benched. He's put on the side, going through mechanical stuff. He's not even active for a few weeks there. Now only gets the opportunity, and this is for the second straight week, to play again because Mike White has several fractured ribs. Where do the Jets stand right now on Zach Wilson, not just in terms of him potentially in any decision, if there even is one, about keeping the job when White is healthy, but also about the big picture and where you go in 2023?
Yeah, I think they're of the reality that there's really nothing he's going to do down the stretch here that's going to allay all fears and say, okay, this is our guy going forward. He's back. He figured it all out. Like, it's too tight of a time frame. So I think what you need to see is, and you started to see it last week, there were a couple of plays, what I call pro day throws, right? The kind of throws that he was making leading up to the draft in his workout to get teams to be excited about it. And what happened this year particularly, and even leading up to this year, was he was paralyzed by something mentally, whatever it was. We even heard back in the spring about how he's got the yips, and you didn't see any of that. It's like, okay, if you're going to play poorly, at least put the skill on display and try to make those sensational throws that made you worthy of the number 2 overall pick in the draft. And you weren't seeing that. So you're making mistakes, and we're not seeing the skill on display. It's like there's a lot to work on with him as far as getting him back mentally. And that was the thought process to benching him was let him be inactive because the inactive guy is going to run our scout team. So let him run our scout team against our top defense, which we know what they've got up front. And now let him feel that in practice, like it's breaking down, and still try to make things work and do the best you can while the play is breaking down. Develop some pocket presence, because in BYU, he didn't have to deal with that. They were so good on their offensive line. They had grown men, because of their mission. They've got guys that are way older than some of these other guys they were going against. And so their offensive line, when he was there, was dominant. and he didn't have to deal with a lot of that. So now he's having to learn that, and it's tough to learn that during the process. So I'll be curious to see which way it goes in the offseason. I don't see anything that's going to change it in regard to, again, him being the unquestioned guy in the Jets hierarchy of quarterbacks. But he can at least thrust himself back into the conversation. He'll probably have to, at the very least, he's going to have to stave off Mike White in an offseason quarterback competition. Who knows where else they can go?
Zach Wilson's also part of kind of this, I don't want to call it a new wave of quarterbacks, but mechanically, he's doing what a lot of high school and college quarterbacks are taught to do now, which is like the Aaron Rodgers stuff. It's not the have your foundation and your base and throw everything on platform and in rhythm. He's got something where it's everything can be, kind of the flick of the wrist. It can be off your back foot. It can be the things we see Rodgers do a lot. And I remember there were a bunch of people who really, thought his tape was amazing. Coaches thought his tape was some of the best that they had ever seen. But the people who were detractors in the pre-draft process also said there is an issue when every throw is a trick shot. And even last week in watching that game, Mike, I felt like some of those throws he's trying to make, including the terrible interception, but even that deep completion he had down the right sideline where he's kind of fading away, it's like he's still throwing the ball in such a way that I go back to Robert Saleh last year when he said something along the lines of he's got to make the layups. Those were the concerns coming in. It was not, can he make every throw? He can. It's, can he make the basic throws consistently enough? And that's one thing I'm going to be just kind of monitoring here for as long as he's on the field.
Well, and then you saw some of those, and that's where the yips came in, right? So you've seen some of those where, he looks downfield, there's nothing there, check it down to the running back in the flat, and he's throwing 5 feet high or wide of him. Those are major issues, and that's why they wanted to kind of get him reset. There was a play against the Patriots where Devin McCourty dropped an interception, and he looks left and kind of comes back to the middle, and he's got absolutely no base to stand on, and that's why the throw itself was just horrendous. And that was like, I don't want to say that was like the play that made them bench him, but it was one of the plays that day. And they said, this is what needs to be corrected right here, basic fundamental stuff. So he had some breakdowns this past week. He had some of those sensational plays, but he also had some mental and physical breakdowns last week. Let's see what he can do, particularly in the rain. I don't know that they're that upset that it's going to be raining tonight. Like, let's add a little bit of that too. Let's see if he can overcome that. We'll see.
Meanwhile, Trevor Lawrence, despite the fact that he's been playing with that toe issue for a couple of weeks now, Mike, is playing the best football we've seen of him in his NFL career. He's looking absolutely like the guy who was the number one overall pick in that same draft with Zach Wilson. And you look at the way that they've kind of built. I remember Philadelphia once referred to it as the nest when they had the guys around the quarterback when Carson Wentz was coming up and playing at an MVP level in year two. And it was at that time, it was Doug Peterson, but he had Mike Groh there. And he had John DiFilippo there in Jacksonville. Now it's Doug. And he's got Press Taylor, who, of course, is also a member of that Eagles staff. It's Mike McCoy, who's an experienced offensive coordinator and quarterback guy. They've found that way to kind of surround him, it seems, with the right people. They've obviously also invested in a bunch of weapons. And he looks like a legitimate starting franchise-type quarterback right now.
He does. And this was year two, and then all of a sudden they loaded up. You often see that. Like, you'll get a high draft pick, and then they load up around him in year two. Because for various reasons, teams usually, if they've got a high draft pick, they're kind of rebuilding, and they're not yet ready to make that splurge in free agency or whatever they do. I remember it back when I covered the Giants with Eli Manning. Year one, he had a Monty tumor and Ike Hilliard, and it's like, okay, he needs some more help. So before year two, they go out and they get Plaxico Burress. They added a couple of offensive linemen as well, and it's like, okay, all of a sudden they were retooled and he had more to work with. You're going to see it in Chicago with Justin Fields this offseason. They're going to be big spenders to start to surround him with some talent at the receiver and tight end position and whatnot. They got Cole Kmet, but they'll reload for him. So you saw it with Jacksonville this past offseason, and now these guys are starting to hit a little bit. Zay Jones has really come on. It's really clicked for him. Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram's a great story, coming back to MetLife Stadium tonight and really starting to get into the swing of things. And, Doug Peterson's been good about, it was Zach Ertz, and I believe he was there for the start of Dallas Goedert. Yeah, being able to use tight ends out of various positions, and all of a sudden it seems to be clicking for Evan Ingram as well. So with Lawrence being able to get these guys and hit them in rhythm, and that toe injury that you talked about, I did talk to Peterson about it. He said he feels it during the game, but it doesn't affect his mobility, and it's been getting better. So that's really helped him as well. He's also, since that Denver game, and Doug's mentioned this before, he mentioned this to me again the other day, so that interception that he threw in London, against Denver, that was a turning point for him. It was I've got to make better decisions. I've got to play better football. And since then, he really has. So give Trevor Lawrence a ton of credit for everything that he dealt with last year and now really building on things this year and moving in the right direction.
My fellow NFL Network insider Mike Garafolo is with us on the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line. Jalen Hurts, Mike, we don't have the final status report, but Nick Sirianni certainly suggested strongly that he's not going to be out there this week. It'll be Gardner Minshew, which is what we've expected throughout the week. He's got a right shoulder sprain. It's his throwing shoulder. From what I'm told, it's not long-term. It is nothing that's going to require surgery, but this is generally an injury that's best treated with rest, which brings me to, I think, an important question, not for just for everybody who has Jalen Hurts in fantasy football, but for the MVP race as well. If the Eagles, with Gardner Minshew, beat the Cowboys on Saturday, wrapping up the number one seed, do we see Jalen Hurts again in the regular season? Do they give him an opportunity to try to polish off the rest of his MVP case, or do they simply rest him and say, see you in second, third week of January?
Well, I think there's two things at play. One, if he misses one game, and we've heard various estimates and takes on whether he's going to be back next week. I've heard some people say he's got a shot, and I've heard some people say he's got no shot. Obviously, if it's no shot, that makes things easy. But if he's got a shot and they've wrapped things up, I think it's easy to play him in week 17. Now, the question is, what if he doesn't play in week 17 and then week 18 rolls around? Because now you're looking at the possibility that it'll be, I believe, a month and 4 days between games if he doesn't play at all in the rest of the regular season, right? So if he's available in week 18, but you've got well, we don't need this game, obviously. We've wrapped everything up. Boy, I'd love to give our starters a rest. I don't know. I think Nick Sirianni might have a tough decision on his hands, and nobody's told me this. And when I ask you about it, they say, we're not talking, it's too soon. We'll worry about that when we get there, in large part because they don't know how the next 2 weeks, they could theoretically lose the next two games. So I think at that point, you may have to play them for rust purposes, right? Just get them, even if it's just a quarter, a half, whatever, get them out there against the Giants and play them a little bit along with the starters because you don't want that long of a layoff if possible. So keep an eye on that one because that could be an interesting scenario. And another thing, it could theoretically, if the Giants lose to Minnesota, which I believe they're expected to, they're not favored in that game, then they've got the Colts the following week, which don't sleep on that team. You could have a scenario where the Giants need that Week 18 game, and the Eagles may play Hurts in their starters, again, because of rust purposes or maybe even for the MVP or whatever it is. That could set up a really interesting scenario between the two divisional rivals. So I've got an eye to Week 18. Let's see how it goes on both fronts there.
No Lamar Jackson again this week, Mike. John Harbaugh saying it's going to be Tyler Snoop Huntley again. Third straight game Lamar has missed. This was kind of a similar type of thing, different injury. Last year it was what ended up being revealed as a bone bruise in his ankle. This year it's a PCL injury in his knee. But there are similar vibes right now out of Baltimore where it certainly sounded like when Lamar got hurt, they thought this week against the Falcons was probably about where he'd be back. He still has not practiced since that injury. There's twofold in terms of the fallout of that. Number one, the Ravens are in a spot now where they got to win this game this weekend or they're really in trouble in the playoff chase. And then the second part of it is Lamar, of course, setting himself up to go year to year, it seems like at this point. And with regard to the idea that he wants a fully guaranteed contract, he's a fantastic player. But if 2 years in a row your franchise quarterback isn't available for the last month of the season, that seems like a pretty big deal when you're talking about a 9-figure investment.
Yeah, you kind of said it all. I agree with all that, all the above. And that's something that the Ravens are going to have to deal with as they also assess whether to keep Greg Roman. I understand John Harbaugh is standing by him right now, which I would expect no less. But, you're kind of in the thick of it now as you approach 2023. Do you want to make a change there? It's a guy who really has designed and executed some of the stuff that's made Lamar Jackson, and go back to Colin Kaepernick with San Francisco, some of the stuff that made him successful. He seems to have dialed up some stuff better than anybody else, which is why the Ravens certainly value what he does in the last couple of years extremely high. I would say that there was, like last week, there was a less than 50% chance that he was going to play. There was an outside chance. This week was like greater than 50%, and the expectation that he would at least be in the run. As soon as he wasn't on the field the other day, it was like, oh boy, he's not practicing to start the week. You kind of knew where this was going to go. I think disappointment that he's not available right now is probably the right word. And I don't want to say disappointment in anything he's doing, but just disappointment that they don't have him for this game that they thought that they would have him. So you're right. I mean, this is now 2 years in a row where, let's see if this drifts into next week, because then you start to get in a scenario where, remember, I remember last year, week to week, it was like, he's going to be out this week, but hopefully next week we'll give it a go in so many words, and just he never came back. So, when it comes to the contract and when it comes to durability, the style he plays, he's been a lot smarter as his career is going on about taking hits, but you're going to play that style. You're going to take hits for sure.
Last thing for you, Mike. I was on a plane awaiting takeoff. It eventually got going 2.5 hours late last night, but when the Pro Bowl show was on and the rosters were released, and the biggest thing that jumped out to me is the leader in fan voting, Tua Tagovailoa, did not make the AFC roster. Obviously, fan voting is 1/3 of it. There's players, there's coaches. I'm sure some people are taking that as, well, why didn't the players and coaches vote for Tua? My reaction was, is anybody going to make a Pro Bowl for like the next 10 years except for Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, and Josh Allen? That's a gauntlet.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, those guys are going to be perennial picks, and outside of guys dropping out with injuries or when they're in the Super Bowl, Pro Bowl games, the inaugural Pro Bowl games, I don't know that anybody, even the guy who leads the NFL in passer rating, is going to be able to break through that triumvirate for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and NFC, he makes it, no question about it. But unfortunately, they still do AFC, NFC. Maybe we've got to go, if we're going away from the game, maybe we've got to go away from that format as well. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, I know you said you don't want to look at it as the players and coaches knocked them down, but they certainly did. Not because of, looking at him saying, well, he didn't do or can't do certain things, but because of what those other guys you're talking about are able to do. So, I'm going to make the point on air later tonight that C.J. Mosley, the Jets linebacker, was 5th in fan voting and then got vaulted up to number 1 via the coaches and the players, which shows the respect that they have for him. It's kind of the opposite at play with Tua right here. So, I know a lot of fans were disappointed in that one. Tuanon surely was disappointed in that one. I didn't see any reaction from those folks. I don't even know. Do we even know who Tuanon is, or are they anonymous? I mean, that would be the anon part of Tuanon, right?
That is a large part of it. Yes.
Dark web.
So it's going to be a battle every year. And if you're talking about those 4 quarterbacks, just those 4 that we're talking about with only 3 spots, there's going to be a disappointment every year if those guys continue to play the way that they have. This year it's Tua. Maybe he gets in next year. We'll see.
What time are you kicking things off on NFL Network from MetLife tonight?
NFL Network at 6 Eastern, game day kickoff. It is with me and Steve Smith, Brian Baldinger. We're going to have Baldy's breakdowns in the studio along with Rhett Lewis and Thomas Davis, because usually it's Colleen, Mike, Rob, and MJD, but they're on their way to Pittsburgh. Steve is with me in Jersey so he can drive. They wanted to make sure the other ones got there early because they had to fly. So it's a little bit of a different cast, but it's going to be a great cast. 6 Eastern, NFL Network, game day kickoff, leading you up to kickoff of Jets-Jaguars.
Thanks for coming on, Mike.
You got it, Tom.
All right. He made it through.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.